As we said, you got this. You know, in 1998, I owned a condominium with my husband. We lived there with our toddler son. I had a good job. We had fun weekends with our family, sailboats, ski boats, cookouts. Lots of cousins for Jeffrey. I would say that during those days, the dots going into my lens were made up of many people who were living the same life. My family, my neighbors, my coworkers. But there was discontent, and I felt like I was not truly myself. It's a really weird feeling that's hard to explain. But after a lot of therapy, some painful discussions, and fear, I separated from my husband and I came out as gay. It is a long story, and I am sure over the years, we will be together. We'll have time to share. Today, I wanted to talk about how it changed my lens, my focal point. Last Sunday, we talked about God living in our dreams versus us living in God's dream. The difference is that God's dream, God's focal point, has a much broader lens. All of creation are in these dots. And it gives God's dream a different focal point. In 1998, that was not my focal point. I had always had God in my life, church in my life, and I would say that at that time, God was in my dreams. I had not even begun to contemplate living in God's dream. Through my divorce, my life was turned upside down, both financially and socially. I lost the financial security I had built it as an adult, something I was extremely proud of because I had had a lot of financial insecurity in my childhood. I lost some of my social network. But more importantly, I lost my social status. I was seen as less than with my new identity as a lesbian. Seen even as a threat in our society through some people's eyes. Well, that was an awakening moment. That opened my eyes. Now you think that it might narrow my lens through fear. But I believe it was my first step toward widening my lens, living in God's dream. The disruption in my world allowed me to hover, to stop, and to see more of the world around me. And this magical thing happened. All these dots, they multiplied. All of this became bigger. I was now encountering more people who had different lives than mine. People who were being harmed by my church. People who were being limited at my workplace. People who had been rejected by their families and needed broader support. I was in a crowd of people who were not making enough money to pay our rent and raise our children. We were relying on each other and our faith in God, honestly. My lens was seeing a world much more broadly. There were so many more dots being fed into my focal point. Now, I can't say it was God's dream yet, but it began to grow larger than my own dreams. When someone goes through trauma, a rejection, a difficult time, our lens broadens. My story is just one. I know there are many, many stories in this room. When I worked with immigrant families, or I would actually say refugee families and families that were seeking asylum, so many of them had dreams to create nonprofits for housing, children's safety, immigrant legal help. Trauma widens our lens and changes our focal point. During this uncertain time, I scraped the money together with friends to go down to Washington, D.C. for the Millennium March. This was in 2000. It was a week-long event supporting LGBTQ plus rights. And for me, it was my first Pride event. Over 200,000 people. Some say 1 million, but I just don't believe that. But it was at least 200,000 people. Filled the National Mall. So many different people of all ages. The full AIDS quilt was on display on the mall. It was amazing. Tears and laughter were all through the crowd. We filled RFK Stadium for the Equality Rocks concert that included Garth Brooks and Shaka Khan and Cher. The diversity was immense. I think Tipper Gore was actually there even. I mean, it's just crazy. And the city was filled with rainbows everywhere, including a police cruiser who drove through DuPont Circle with a rainbow flag waving out of their window. It was, I mean, it still makes me tear up. During those days, I learned about the generational trauma of being LGBTQ+, the history of resilience, the work that had been done before me. I felt a belonging to something bigger than me. My lens got wider. I began to feel acceptance and a calling. I was still in my dreams. But that was the first time I got a glimpse, just a glimpse of God's dream. Legacy, history, depth of community are all things that widen our lens. When we step back, hover over our situation, and see our context among many, and our context within the continuum of time, our lens widens. In seminary, I learned more deeply about Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movement, and all of the transformative, resilient survivors and innovators in Black history and culture. I learned how integral faith in God was in this long history. The faith in God's dream that strengthened people as they navigated obstacles and evils placed in their lives. My lens widened. Not because I had experienced that trauma, but because I was able to put my own trauma into context with the life experiences of others, the history of others. I thank God for my ability to hover in seminary, to absorb and learn and experience with my body and my mind. all of the dots began to organize, into a focal point. I saw the possibilities of God's lens, God's broad lens. And it was in seminary that I committed myself to God's dream. The more I widened my lens, the more God's dream came into focus, a world of stability, safety, acceptance, and love. Loving God, loving our neighbors. We've got this. You've got this. Solidarity, living together, being together. What the heck does this all have to do with Jesus and the devil, Fran? Well, you may have noticed that the devil in the story has a narrow lens, and Jesus has a wide one. The Holy Spirit brought Jesus out to the wilderness to hover, to contemplate, to bring into focus his ministry, how he would live in God's dream. And the devil kept distracting him with a narrow lens. Just turn the stone into bread for yourself, Jesus. Jesus doesn't fall for it. He replies, my lens is broader. We don't live by bread alone. The devil says, worship me and have all the political power on this earth. Jesus says, my lens is broader. We should worship only God, serve God's dream. The devil says, shouldn't God protect you from suffering? Jesus replies, my lens is broader. I will not test God. I will focus a broad lens on God's dream. This is the good news. We have this one life to experience as broad of a lens as we possibly can experience. The good news is that God has created a world with an infinite ability for us to widen our lens. The good news is that when we live a life constantly widening our lens by growing in community, meeting our neighbors where they are, destroying obstacles that separate us, our life becomes focused, more and more focused on God's dream. When we live loving God and loving our neighbor, God's dream comes more and more into focus until we are finally living in God's dream. May it be so. May you be able to find time to hover, to contemplate, as Jesus did in the wilderness. For most of us, it takes much more than 40 days, maybe 40 years, to find God's dream, to widen our lens, and to bring the dream into focus. Blessings on the journey.